good, y'all? We back with another video, man. I got my friend on break today. Today we got legendary mystery lost cities. Finna learn about, man. Y'all just sit back and get educated. You know what I'm saying? Just sit back and relax. Grab y'all like a little snack or something. You know what I'm saying? Just vibe, bro.
Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10, Lost City of Caesars. The Wandering City, or the City of Caesars, supposedly existed once in the land of Patagonia, a great natural landscape spanning much of Chile and Argentina. According to accounts from ancient history, this city was rich in gold and diamonds. The people of the Wandering City were described as having strangely pale skin and being as tall as giants. The city's existence has been debated for over 200 years, and nobody has ever found evidence that it truly did exist. The origin of the city takes us back to 1515. Spanish explorer Juan de Solis was attacked by Native Americans while on an expedition near what is present-day Buenos Aires. The survivors were forced to trek inland, deep into the forbidding lands of Patagonia, and that was when they came upon a beautiful city inhabited by a race of tall, pale men. Juan de Solis and his men shared stories of the city with other Spaniards. In 1528, Jesuit missionaries and explorer Francisco Cesar went searching for the city, believing it to be an island of salvation. They never found it. In 1540, a ship was wrecked off the coast of Patagonia, and about 200 lives were lost. Then, in 1563, 23 years after the disaster, 2 members of the crew returned to civilization and told the story of how they survived and came across a city filled with treasure. This was supposedly the City of Caesars. And yet, for all these crazy stories and supposed sightings, nobody in modern times has ever laid eyes on the place. Number 9. Perpericon. Perpericon was inhabited starting in 5000 BC. 7,000 years ago, primitive human beings lived on this great forested hill in what is now Bulgaria. The early settlement eventually became a Thracian holy sanctuary, and later a Roman town. The history of this lost city is extremely complex. Legend tells us that during the days of ancient Thrace, the Temple of Dionysus was built here. From within the temple were said great prophecies by oracles. In 334 BC, Alexander the Great traveled to the Temple of Dionysus.
I heard Alexander the Great before. I think in school.
The oracle told Alexander that he would live to conquer the world, and that was exactly what he did. Oddly enough, the same thing was said to Gaius Octavius when he visited the oracle at the temple in 59 BC, almost 300 years later. He was told that his son, a child who would grow to be the great Emperor Augustus, would rule the world. Perpericon was one of the few places not destroyed by the Romans during their warmongering. It was originally built as a religious sanctuary by the Thracians, but when the Romans took over the territory for good around the 1st century AD, they expanded it into a city instead of destroying it. It was only destroyed in the 4th century when the Goths showed up and smashed everything in their path. In the 6th century, Perpericon experienced a brief revival. Christian churches were built and it became a military stronghold in medieval days. But after the 13th century, the place was widely abandoned and became lost. Now, the historic site is littered with the ruins of houses, altars, tombs, and sacred sites, all on the top of a tall hill overlooking the beautiful Bulgarian countryside. Number 8. The Lost City of Indiana Jones. In Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Nazis discover a mysterious lost city while hunting for the Ark of the Covenant. They found the city of Tanis in Egypt, buried by a sandstorm thousands of years ago. And while most of what you see in the Indiana Jones movie is far removed from reality, Tanis is in fact a real place. It has absolutely nothing to do with the Nazis, and there was no Ark, but it is a real lost city with a shocking past. Tanis was the capital of the 21st and 22nd dynasties of ancient Egypt. It was ruled over by the Tanite kings in what is called the Third Intermediate Period. It became a wealthy commercial center, fueled by the water of the Nile Delta. According to National Geographic, the rulers of Tanis were unique in that they came from Libya. not from the traditional Egyptian families. The Third Intermediate Period was one of the most chaotic times in Egyptian history, with widespread violence, famine, and anarchy. This was a time of weak government and lawlessness, as well as poorly kept historical records.
I'm
don't know
glad I
what
wasn't
happened to
born
the
back
city.
then. That
It
then,
seems
back
to have
then, like,
vanished
right
by
there.
664 BC, and although it
Then
wasn't
again,
technically buried by a sandstorm,
probably not
it
first time
was
here.
lost to the desert. The Nile Delta dried up, and the whole place became an arid salt flat. The city wasn't uncovered again until 1939 by French archaeologist Pierre Montet. It was one of the biggest discoveries of the 20th century, with the city found nearly in the exact same condition as when it was abandoned 2,500 years earlier. Number 7. Otrar. The ancient city of Otrar is not the easiest place to get to. It's a ghost town located in modern Kazakhstan, originally a city along the legendary Silk Road. It was one of the
Silk
most
Road, I heard
important
of Silk Road
places in
before.
Central Asia, sitting in the middle of a lush oasis. The region, although now totally barren and empty, was once beautiful, but the water has since dried up. The residents have long left, and the city was covered for centuries by raging
All these lost cities and
sandstorms.
something we never
It
know
was
about.
wildly
Like,
important
it's
2,000
probably way
years
more than
ago
out here.
because
Way
it
more
sat
we
at
don't
the
know about,
crossroads
bro.
between China and Europe, the Near East and Middle East, and the tribes of Siberia to the north. It's not clear when the first people lived here, but the first residents were almost certainly part of the Persian Empire around 550 BC. The city then maintained its prosperity up until the Mongol invasion of 1219. Genghis Khan
1219.
besieged the city, breached its walls, and massacred everyone inside. This led to almost every town within a day's journey being abandoned and covered in sand. After the Khan's death, Ortar rose from the dead to become a bustling trade center once again. It continued to flourish, but things were never really the same. The city was captured by everyone from the Uzbeks to the Dzungars. But it was ultimately the Silk Road losing its importance in the 17th century that caused Ortar to become a lost ghost town in the middle of an unoccupied desert. And now for number 6, but first it's shout-out time! Want to say a big thank you to Jen Giesenhoff and Alan Viggins. Thanks so much for watching. Haven't already. Could be the oldest Christian church in the Horn of Africa. 3 churches were discovered in the ancient city of Adulis, located north of Ethiopia in the little-known nation of Eritrea. The churches are ancient, with one of them dating back to the second half of the 4th century AD. This was just after the Edict of Milan, when Constantine the Great, Emperor of Rome, decriminalized Christianity and took the first step into creating a Christian Europe. What this means is that the church in this lost city was one of the very first official Christian structures in North Africa. The city itself dates back to around the 1st century AD. It was important in the Aksumite kingdom as a trading hub. It was a stop on a road that was not quite as famous as the Silk Road or the Amber Road, but one that facilitated trade east to west. This was a crucial trading route for much of Africa and one of the core centers that made the Aksumites of Ethiopia so rich. It's unclear what exactly happened to the city, but it vanished from the historical records in the 7th century. It was rediscovered
crazy,
about
bro.
1,000 years later on an ancient map, then discovered by outsiders at the end of the 19th century. The city appears to have been flooded, perhaps by a sudden burst from the Uwadi Hadas River. The most interesting part of this city is still the church. The ruin of the old sanctuary is a reminder that North Africa was one of the most powerful and devout Christian regions at the beginning of Christianity. They celebrated Christ long before the religion really took a foothold in Rome. Number 5. Ancient Sunken
Alright.
Village.
So they-
A
so they- so they
sunken village
OGs
with
basically.
Viking
They-
origins has just emerged in
they done did it
Yorkshire
all.
from a dried-up reservoir. Record drought in the
Yeah.
United Kingdom caused the water levels of the Batings Reservoir to plummet, revealing a lost village that hasn't been seen since the 1950s. It was called Batings, and it was famous up until it was submerged for its pack horse bridge. The bridge was centuries old, originally used to bring supplies on pack horses through the Pennine Hills. This linked ancient Yorkshire with ancient Lancaster. It's believed the village was settled by people of Norse origins, possibly Vikings, around 1,000 years ago.
Vikings.
It thrived in ancient days and then developed rapidly in the Industrial Revolution. But like so many towns that had done well prior to industrialization, Beatings began to suffer in the 21st century. By the time it was decided to flood the city to make a reservoir, very few residents remained. This has been the first time that the ruins of the lost village have been seen since it was flooded. The only other time the reservoir levels fell dangerously low was in 1989. That was when a man named Lawrence Winstanley was found with a gunshot wound to his head and tied to a heavy pickaxe. He had been murdered a year prior and dumped in the reservoir. His murder has never been solved. Number 4. Cao Peng. Established around the year 780, Cao Peng was a thriving Viking town on the western edge of Norway. It wasn't as big as some of the other major Viking towns in Sweden and Denmark, such as Birka and Hedeby, but it was a bustling city and a prosperous place to live. It had high economic importance and was the site of much trade with people from faraway lands. Scholars believe Cao Peng to be the oldest functioning city in Norway.
I guess it won't matter.
Just shy of 100 years after it was founded, the city ran into some troubles. The land was extremely fertile, and this was making the kings from other Viking territories jealous. Historical records from 813 show that Danish kings battled for control of the region. There are no historical records of any great bloody battles, but it doesn't really matter because by the 10th century, the whole place was abandoned. Other cities such as Tonsberg and Ski rose up in Norway, growing more rapidly and becoming more prosperous than Cao Peng, and the city just kind of fell to the wayside. One theory archaeologists have is that the water level dropped. There may have been a short span of time in which boats could no longer dock at the city, making trade impossible. The city was then lost and abandoned, and only recently excavated in 1956. Number 3. Stok Kok Thom. In the 1980s, the ancient Thai temple of Stok Kok Thom was used as a refugee camp. Originally a Hindu monument and sanctuary for Lord Shiva, it became a sanctuary for Cambodians fleeing their civil war. The temple was in a state of great disrepair, falling to pieces and littered with landmines. The only people who visited the temple were warlords, displaced refugees, and gun dealers. 40 years later, things are very different. The temple of Stok Kok Thom is now a popular tourist site and has been rebuilt. People are coming to this ancient place in the jungle to learn of its mysterious history. The temple was originally part of the powerful Khmer Empire, one of the greatest kingdoms the world has ever seen. It was connected to other major sites, temples, and cities, all the way to Prasat Wat Phu in Laos. Construction began in 937 under the rule of King Jayavarman IV, then was completed in 1052. In the 11th century, this wasn't only a temple, it was a small village. People from the local rice farming communities tended the sacred structure. People lived in its shadow, and it was a lively community of Hindus and then Buddhists. It was shortly after the temple was built that it was abandoned. Like much of the Khmer Empire, the temple was lost.
It's always some getting abandoned.
Died, and the whole thing was reclaimed by nature.
Eventually they
it was abandoned and lost, and wasn't found again until a French explorer came along in the 19th century. Number 2. Norea. Norea was already a lost city when Pliny the Elder wrote of its existence in the 1st century AD. Julius Caesar claimed it was the capital of the Celtic kingdom of Noricum, located somewhere in the Eastern Alps, most likely southern Austria. The location of this lost city has never been uncovered, nor has its existence ever been officially verified. What we do know based on Roman historical records is that the Celtic kingdom of Noricum was a primary provider of weaponry. These Celtic people had developed an unprecedented method for forging steel. Roman swords may have been made from the best quality steel available, but it wasn't the Romans who made them. They purchased the weapons from the Celtic forge masters. The Celts were forging superior steel starting around the year 500 BC, and they became hugely wealthy by trading these weapons to the Romans. In the days of the Roman Republic, prior to the Roman Empire of the 1st century, Noricum was one of their major allies. They traded weapons for protection. It was a formal military alliance, with the Celts operating from their mystical city in the mountains called Norea. In 16 BC, Noricum was absorbed by Rome, and the location of their great city has since been lost. Number 1.
Bruh.
The Lost Cities of
Number
Dubai.
1.
The Desert Kingdom of the United Arab Emirates is rich in ancient history. The great city of Dubai might be one of the most technologically advanced in the 21st century. But just beyond its borders, out in the dry and barren wasteland of the desert, there are lost
couldn't be
cities
out there,
thousands
bruh.
of years old.
I already know.
The truth
bruh.
is that people have been living on the Arabian Peninsula for over 100,000 years. First,
Ain't
it
no
was
way,
primitive
bruh.
cave people hunting and foraging.
I'm
These
saying,
people later turned into
every day you
farmers,
gotta learn. Hey,
and
where my
eventually
food gonna come from? You
civilizations
gotta
that
go out and
mastered
hunt and
bronze
do all.
and
ain't
other
man.
technologies.
I mean, if I had to do
One
it,
of
I
the
had to
most
do it, but,
important
like,
places in
compared
the
to
ancient
now,
world
like,
was the land of Magan,
you
near
better
the
just go down
modern
the street and
border
some
of
Chick-fil-A or
Oman.
some Zappy's or
It was one
something,
of the
you know.
first major suppliers for bronze tools throughout the Middle
They
East.
getting it how
It
they
functioned
live,
at a
man. They
time
got
when
no
some of the
choice.
greatest cities
Gotta
in
eat.
Sumer were flourishing, such as Ur and Uruk. Just north of Al Ain, archaeologists have uncovered tombs, buildings, and strange ruins where the stones were cut so precisely you can't even get a piece of floss between them. The technological innovations
Dang.
here were impressive,
Can't even get a
especially
piece of
since the
floss?
stonework
Man, that's
dates
cap.
back
That's cap,
4,700 years. One of the largest cities found in the region is that of Leha, that goes back roughly 2,000 years. The city was about a mile wide and was inhabited for roughly 500 years. It was abandoned around the 1st century and slowly covered by sand. It's one of many lost cities out
Dang,
here in
bruh.
the Arabian desert, many of which have never been found. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, man. Junk crazy. Lost cities. Man, it's probably way more than what she just said too, bro. Hopefully y'all like the video, bro. Hopefully y'all learned something today. And yeah, man. See y'all tomorrow, bro.